Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry update. So, earlier today we talked about Bethesda's plan to save Fallout 76 through its 2019 live service. Well, now it's time to give BioWare the same treatment, with them recently posting the Anthem live service roadmap. So in an official blog post by the head of live service, Chad Robinson, they said that they are excited, but at the same time they are anxious, saying that they are coming off an early access period where they understand they have a lot of work ahead of them to improve the game. Chad said that they aim to make quality of life fixes to the game based on community feedback, with their initial patch fixing quite a few of the problems, which I mean is pretty fair and pretty true, and more patches being on the way for the game. He then continues talking about how much more they want to add to the game over time, with them now showing their first 90 days roadmap for Anthem, and they're going to detail more as time goes on, but this gives us a pretty fair idea of what to expect. Now look, to catch you up, Anthem released with a relatively short campaign comprised of missions. These missions were then sort of padded out with contracts which were similar but, well, a lot more filler-like. Now, the missions and the contracts really form a lot of the core of the Anthem gameplay, with the endgame content really involving a lot of repetition of those things on harder difficulties. Now, of course, on top of that, there are 3 strongholds, which are basically Anthem's equivalent to dungeon/raid content, and on top of that, there is free play, where you just roam about the world, doing public events and collecting resources of various types. On the whole, it's fairly sparse, with many quality of life features being missing, things that really should be there. Now, while core loot shooter fans really probably don't care about the story that much and will probably rate the game higher than the critic average, I think it's fair to say that most people do think the game needs a good bit more. So with that in mind, let's just talk about this live service roadmap. In February 2019, there are 3 free play events. What does this mean? We don't exactly know, but each one of them is themed after an in-game faction. We've got Outlaw, Outrage, so a public events and stuff surrounding the Outlaws. There's There Be Giants, which is similar, but, featuring the Ash Giants. And then the Shaper Surge, which is similar, but, with the Shapers. Now, the Shaper Ruins are actually some of the more interesting areas in the game, so you know what, that's probably pretty decent. Now, look, I doubt these things will be massive, but right now free play does feel rather aimless. I actually do imagine that free play would be a good bit more engaging and purposeful, with some of these events being active, I suppose. So, that's it for February. With February being almost over, I think that's fine for this month. Next up for March, well, we've got the Elysian Stronghold caches. Basically, it sounds like a cosmetic loot box that comes from strongholds, which of course are the game's most challenging form of content. Will these be tied into the microtransaction store? That is a big worry, and yeah, hopefully not. Past that, in March though, the live service is going to contain new items, and interestingly, Phase 1 of Legendary Missions. What are these? Well, it's hard to know. The teaser image does show 2 of the game's main characters, so at worst it's just a new difficulty level of existing missions or maybe a modifier. However, at best these could be missions that continue our relationship with those characters and continue the story, making Legendary Missions a way to deliver an ongoing character-driven story for Anthem. Now, these 2 characters, there's the core of something that could be good there, but they didn't really have enough room to breathe with the main story, but if BioWare were to continually add content like these, legendary quests, and they were actually good, that could slowly turn into something that overall is quite good. Past that, March is going to see the repeat of the There Be Giants and Outlaw Outrage events, as well as 2 other free play events which have not been detailed yet. So, some new missions a month after launch? That sounds pretty good, I suppose. Moving on to April, well, that's where we see far more content. First was the Mastery system, which is said to expand the game's progression as well as new items. We then see the continuation of more free play events with Shaper Surge returning, and then 6 other unknown events. April then also brings in Legendary Missions Phase 2, which continues the system started in the previous month. And then this month also brings in a new stronghold called the Sunken, as well as weekly stronghold challenges, leaderboards, and guilds. They then left us with a tease of May, which is set to bring a new free play event, new missions, new items, as well as the game's first Cataclysm. Now, what is a Cataclysm? Well, they seem to be major events. Now, narratively, the Heart of Rage that forms the core of the initial storyline, that is referred to as a cataclysm by the in-game characters. Now, after the completion of the main story, the Heart of Rage cataclysm is available as a stronghold that you can go and do. So this new cataclysm could bring a new stronghold. If it did, that would bring us up to 5 strongholds in the game pretty soon after launch. Or of course, it could be something different entirely. So overall, what do we make of this? Well, first, I think that Anthem, it faces problems in a few areas. First, it simply does not have enough content. Then I think it really faces a problem where the content itself is quite lackluster. The core missions are not really designed. They're mostly just sort of objectives strung around the world. They just do not feel up to the same par as missions in most other games. They then also suffer from a host of common sense issues. I mean, it's an RPG without a stat sheet, which is a bit wild. So, will more content help the game? Yeah, absolutely it will. But what's far more important is the quality of that content. So, personally, my big hope is that the legendary missions and the new stronghold are significantly better than the current ones. I really don't think that the current missions of Anthem live up to the combat system that they have implemented into the game, nor do they do a good job of taking the game's flight system into account. On the whole, future content for this game is going to have to step up its game in the design department. So, I mean, with the setup of this, they have that opportunity now. That is decently exciting, and over time it does mean that they could add a library of content that really could start to change things around. In terms of the missions and stuff like that, what I really like to see is a lot more use of flight, but actually being used well for combat. I'm not sure exactly how they would do this, but right now I think it's easy to spell out the problem. Flying in Anthem often just feels like you have no clip turned on. It negates the geometry of the level, which means that it's hard for a traditional level designer to actually make an engaging combat arena, because what's the point in making an engaging combat arena when players can just fly all over it? So I think they really need to rethink that stuff. They also really need to rethink their enemies. Right now, enemy variety is a massive issue for the game. As much fun as it is generically, throwing spells at something with a storm javelin, well, they really do need more fun enemies. That's something that Destiny really got down, having enemies that are fun to shoot at. Right now, Anthem does not really have that. So for me, the core of it is seeing if this content ups its game in terms of its quality. The quantity is needed, but a higher quantity of content that I don't really feel like playing because it's not particularly fun, that's not going to help. So they really need to engage their level designers, just engage their design staff. Hopefully, if they have enough time to plan this stuff out, they are able to really up their game in terms of that content. Now, in terms of other problems, well, there are a lot of other issues with Anthem. It would be nice if we could do a little bit more loadout customization once we're actually in a level. I think there are times where it would make sense to allow players to do that. I also think that there are loads of quality of life things. I mean, let's just have a stat sheet for our javelins that coalesces everything together. There's a lot of common sense things like that. Also, the loading screens, even with a day one patch, they are still a little bit too long, and it would be nice if just things were a little bit faster in terms of the user interactions, getting around Tarsus, actually just getting to do the stuff that you want to do. Destiny does throw a lot of that to your main, I forget what it's called, the main menu thing of Destiny that shows all the different planets. And it's not immersive in that you're not walking around the world and talking to NPCs while you're doing that, I think the director, while you're using the Destiny director. But you know what? It's like, I want to go to Mars, I'm just going to hold the tab button, going to go to Mars. Really simple. There's also things like waypoints in free play. Just a lot more of that stuff needs to be done. And overall, it does bring up something that's really, really, I think, interesting to me. So they've had all of this content ready, right? Because the stuff that's coming out in 2 months, it's probably done now, okay? So we know about that. We also know that the early access period for this game really had a lot of problems. I'm really thinking to myself, would it have been so bad to delay Anthem by a month? To have included a little bit more of that content at launch, to have had things like leaderboards and guilds at launch, to have had things like a stat sheet at launch. They knew all of these problems existed. And I don't really blame BioWare for this one, I actually blame EA. I think that if BioWare had have been able to just take another month for this game, I don't think they would have been able to get their Open Critic score up to 85, or to 80, or maybe even to 75. But I'll tell you what, maybe they could have got that 7 out of 10. A lot of the silly little problems with Anthem, the things which just require a little bit more design time to get down, you really wonder if some of those things could be fixed, especially since we know that many of them are going to be patched in the very near future. And that really is the problem with a game like this, well, just with a game in general. First impressions really matter, and as I covered recently, if you make early access, if you make the launch experience of your game something that's really tailored to your most dedicated players through things like Origin access as a VIP demo or the early access sort of early release date that the game had, you risk burning your most dedicated fans, and they're the people you cannot afford to lose because they're the rock that you build they're the rock you build your house on. They're so important. And it just does seem like in pushing that game out when they did, they hurt themselves and they did some long-term damage. Now, of course, the bright spot with Anthem is, this content is going to be coming out regardless of whether I play it or not. And that means that in 6 months' time, well, we're going to have a lot more of that live service content. And that means that if I choose to come back to Anthem, I'm probably going to be faced with a far better game. And this might sound similar to what I said at the end of my Fallout 76 roadmap video, because at the end of the day, it's really important to call out the negatives and to be realistic and be honest about games. But that also does mean we have to be honest about potential and honest about where things could actually go. That's the other side of the coin, and it's really important we talk about that as well. So the good thing about this is these content updates are free. Now, of course, they're being monetized through the in-game store, but the core content, it is something that's free. It means that in 6 months, you can come back to Anthem if you didn't like it at launch, and, you can, because you've already bought the game, you just hop in for free, and if the game does have a, Destiny Taken King-like revival at some stage, well, unlike with Destiny, you just gotta go and play it. You see, that's the thing with Destiny 2. I'm pretty sure this is really something that came on orders from Activision because I believe they wanted yearly sort of major fall releases. And I think that's something that's held through the entire Destiny franchise, which probably meant that they felt like they had to break more stuff out into DLC than they otherwise will have wanted to do. Because of that, I think that really was a limiting factor on Destiny 2, because that game came out, it then had Curse of Osiris and Warmind. They weren't really that transformative, and then it had Forsaken, which did a lot of good for the game. But the problem was that Forsaken was expensive. Forsaken was a pretty darn premium DLC, and because of that, it really limited Destiny 2's ability to do that turnaround, to make that comeback. With Destiny 1, I think Taken King was able to make that comeback because so many people wanted that game to work, and it was the first time that they had, been through that experience. Whereas with Destiny 2, they probably felt burnt from the first time. Burnt from the fact that the first time made it a lot better, and then Destiny 2 reset the whole thing. And really, that's the core difference between Anthem and between Destiny, and why Anthem is so much better poised to have a comeback, even though it probably is starting off from a worse position. That stuff's free. Even with World of Warcraft, the game that I mainly cover on my other channel, if the Nazjatar patch or the 8.3 patch, if they're incredibly good, I'm going to have to pay money for my subscription fee to check it out again. Whereas with Anthem, if one of your friends is still playing Anthem, and it turns out that, the winter patch is really good, then that friend can convince you to play Anthem at only the cost of, the time taken for it to download. And that will allow for a network effect to save that game, should they release good content. So right now, the incentives are all aligned correctly for BioWare. The right way for them to make this game better is quite simply to make good content and have that be spread by word of mouth. At the end of the day, while, as somebody who likes BioWare and feels like Anthem really departed from a lot of their strengths, there was a lot of negative coverage to do, I suppose, but ultimately, I do wish them the best. I hope that in a year's time, we can come back to Anthem and have it be a positive story net. So that's what I think about this topic. Let me know what you think down below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.